Welcome back to NTRA Live as we preview the Breeders' Cup. We're finished with the Friday card. Randy Moss with Eric Wing here as we now turn the page and look at Saturday, which begins the Breeders' Cup element of Saturday's card at Churchill Downs. Begins at 1:50 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday with the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. You're talking 1 mile on the grass here as we take a look at the pre-entrants. There were a bunch of them. There were 18 pre-entered in all in this field, but a couple of them are not expected to run. Biondetti and Rogue Romance were also pre-entered in the Juvenile on dirt, which we'll get to in a little bit later. They are expected to run on dirt instead of on grass. Typhoon Slew and Rough Sailing would be the two on the alternate list, also eligible list, that would draw in if those two indeed go run on the dirt. Master of Hounds from Europe, Aidan O'Brien at 4-1. There you see some of the other odds as made by Mike Watchmaker. Now we've transitioned from Brad Free to Mike Watchmaker. I thought this was a very evenly matched race. I was not particularly impressed with the American two-year-old turf horses here. And as we mentioned before, it's my rule of thumb, and I think yours as well, is when you get a division on turf with European imports, and you feel like the American horses are maybe not quite up to where they've been in past years, then the Europeans are primed to dominate. And I think, personally, this is what we're looking at here.
Oh, I agree. And I think even people who follow American two-year-old grass racing would say that Winter Memories has probably been as or more impressive than any of the males so far who will be from America, representing America in the juvenile turf.
But I've got a little different look at the Europeans here as you look at my top five. Master of Hounds is definitely the horse to beat here, but I was extremely impressed with the video of the Brian Meehan trained Manitoba. The class level that Manitoba has been running against in his 3 races so far is not quite up to what Master of Hounds faced last time out in Group 1 at Doncaster. But Manitoba was visually extremely impressive in that last win at Newmarket. A very strong finish, was really striding away, whereas Master of Hounds, although it was against tougher competition, just didn't quite give you that strong finishing kick that I think I'd like to see from Europeans. Dew Scholar also is a horse coming from Europe that was just beaten at Newberry last out. I've got one American on the list, that's Sold Out. And Utley is trained by John Gosden, who happens to have won this race in its previous 2 runnings.
Well, at least Utley is named after an American, being by Smart Strike and being owned by a Pennsylvanian in George Strawbridge. He's obviously named after Chase Utley, though he's been doing all his racing in France and England so far. Randy, this is the kind of race, the two juvenile grass races and the marathon. I mean, I suppose I'm always guessing, but I feel like I'm guessing even more in these races just because it's hard to quantify or to meld the European form and the American form. I'm standing here learning as I go because one race I failed to watch was the Houghton Condition Stakes,
the one I referenced,
which
with
I now know I have to go watch to see how Manitoba looked, because my under the radar horse in here was you called him Dew Scholar. I'm gonna anglicize it and call him Duck Scholar. But now he ran second by a nose last time in something called the Horace Hill Stakes to a horse named Clommer, who's named after Franz Clommer. Clommer had previously run second to the European 2-year-old undefeated sensation Frankel. Now, he was beaten a lot by Frankel, but competitive to some degree nonetheless. Duck Scholar came within a nose of him. Now, after Clommer won that race over Duck Scholar, Clommer's trainer Jane Chappell-Hyam said, "I'm thrilled. I want to take this horse to the Breeders' Cup." A couple of days later, the trainer said, "Well, I begged the owner, but he won't let me. He wants to go to Hong Kong instead." Now, Clommer's trainer wanted to go to and thought they could win the Breeders' Cup with Clommer, so I figured Duck Scholar has to have something of a chance too, and Sir Michael Stout didn't have to have his arm twisted to bring Duck Scholar along with his contingent.
The American horse, I think, is really the only American horse that would even, as my top 5 would indicate, that would stand much of a shot. Well, I'm going to give you 2, really. One's really off the radar. Sold Out. 2 races back in the With Anticipation at Saratoga. Sold Out was very visually impressive. He got the right kind of trip, but The time was solid, 1:41.1 for a mile and a 16th at Saratoga. He was much the best in that field. Then he came back in the Pilgrim, and it was sort of a funky race. He didn't get away that well from the gate. He was caught on the outside. It was a yielding turf course that he might not have liked. He was wide on the turn and at the top of the stretch. Looked like he was going to win at the 8th pole, and then just kind of hung the last 1/8 of a mile. Maybe back on firm footing if that's indeed what we get at Churchill Downs. Soldat can bounce back and can at least show a little more than he did in the Pilgrim. If he runs the same way he ran in the Pilgrim, you won't be able to find him with a search warrant.
Randy, by the way, feel free to use the term under the radar at your...
It's not copyrighted.
No.
Okay.
Feel free. We got a question from the mysteriously named chatter Tribeca Agent. And Tribeca Agent was wondering when the post positions are drawn for these races. And I can tell you myself, it's going to be Tuesday. But what I want to ask you as a companion question to that, Randy, is, and maybe it's particularly relevant in a race like a 1 mile grass race, how much revision do you do after the post positions are drawn? And does it vary depending on which race we're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. I suppose we probably should have started off with that caveat that I mean, if we're talking about ranking horses as it stands today, Saturday, October the 30th, and then for example, we have a horse that draws post 14 going a mile and a 16th on the dirt at Churchill Downs, who's a mid-pack kind of horse. I mean, that's a serious disadvantage, and it definitely post position is going to play an impact more so in races that start close to the turn, like this race, like the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, the Juvenile Fillies Turf, like the mile and a 16th dirt races, the Juvenile and the Juvenile Fillies. Less so for races like the Sprint or the Mile, the dirt mile I'm talking about, where you've got the long run down the backstretch before you hit the turn.
Now, do you hate horses, let's say in the Sprint, that draw the rail?
Depending on their running style, it can be a disadvantage. If it's a speed horse that draws the rail, it doesn't bother me at all. If it's a horse that wants to be in front anyway, that's fine as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't bother me that much. But definitely you can find situations where you have horses that are stalkers in a big field that draw the fence in sprint races that can get swamped and can find it difficult to get out. So that can definitely be a disadvantage. But yes, I mean, post position is certainly a factor. Jerry Bailey has actually taught me a lot about how jockeys think relative to post positions, about how you look at races and you look at horses after the draw from sort of a jockey's perspective. Like it's really interesting to hear Jerry talk about it, and you get a glimpse into what made Jerry perhaps the best rider of all time.
And probably the biggest thinking man's jockey of all time.
Exactly. I mean, he really is very good at looking at fields and saying, well, okay, this horse draws the 2-hole, but he knows this horse is to his outside, and so he's got to do this and that. So yeah, but it's a long answer to a simple question. Post position does matter.
Yeah, I remember with Bailey, he was one of the first, the only jockey when I was a young fan who I'd say, gee, I'd really like number 6 if they just moved him a little closer to the lead today. And when Bailey was on a horse like that, he would seem to follow the script much more so than other riders. I had one rider tell me at Churchill that for the mile straightaway races, you want to be in the middle. Mm-hmm. And I didn't pay it much thought, but the more mile straightaway races at Churchill seen, I guess I've seen, and we can talk about it later for the dirt mile, but that does seem to be a plus, just, if you can draw like 4 through 9, something in there, but take that with a grain of salt.
So under the radar here?
Oh, yes, with the under the radar, what race are we on? The Juvenile Turf. Oh, yes, my under the radar horse, I already discarded this race. I'm a little disordered.
It wasn't Duck Scholar, was it?
No, that was the girls' race. For the boys' race, it was, well, put up the graphic and I'll remember who it was.
Not that graphic.
The
other graphic.
Oh, we already did my Juvenile.
Okay,
we did my under the radar.
Okay.
That's why
right.
I had properly discarded my race 4.
Okay, now we're done with the Juvenile Turf, mercifully. Let's move on now. The Sprint is next in the lineup here. I like to ask Eric the same question twice.